just want to say thank you to our speakers, and if we have a few minutes for a couple questions. Does anyone have a question?
I do.
Okay, one and two.
My question is, if our legislature and other elected officials do not abide by our founding documents and other laws, what reason do the people have to abide by the laws that are created by that legislature?
Who would like to answer that? Yes, okay.
You know, obviously your principle is a correct one, that we are all bound by the Constitution to work together and bound by the same laws. I would also point out, though, there is a common email that I get that says I should be in jail for voting for this, that, or the other because that person disagrees with me.
I'm sorry.
And it just bears repeating that our Constitution is, while certainly the most important document in our nation, it is also not a document of criminal law. It is the recourse for citizens who believe that their legislature or any elected official, including county officials, are violating the Constitution in a way that is destructive of public policy. The only way that there is recourse is through our electoral process. And so I certainly agree deeply with your principle, very much so. But to the extent that there are those on both fringes of the political spectrum that believe that so-and-so is doing this, that, or the other against the Constitution and should somehow be held criminally responsible for that act, that is, I believe, an unsupportable position based on our legal precedent and the way our structure works here in Maryland.
I do history for a living. And most people who do history for a living, I think, find more gray. Actually, using what Delegate Spiegel ended, I think most Americans, not all, would think he could be criminally punished for his ending. Most Americans in 1787. And I'm reasonably confident of that because I've read the stuff, gone through it. And so the answer is, it turns out that elected officials almost never act in ways that every reasoning person thinks violates the Constitution. They frequently act in ways I think violates the Constitution. They frequently act in ways that you think violate the Constitution. But usually, it's a difference of opinion. And one of the more fundamental things that got settled, and the Union almost split apart in 1800 over it, was a decision that maybe people could just be wrong about the Constitution and not tyrants.
Would you like to add to that, Delegate Spiegel? Would you like to add anything?
I just want to know when I'm going to jail.
Oh, bringing the government into disrepute.
Oh, okay.
Ask Upton Sinclair. He went to jail for almost your utterance.
Well, I'll go to jail for that if they're in disrepute. I have no problem with that.
Yeah. And the framers believed.
Okay, we have one more question. Sir, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to go to Mr. Graber for a second. Your comments you made about you can't put a length of residency requirement. So if in my county, I want to say, in order to be eligible for social services, you have to have lived in our county for X amount of time. Are you suggesting that that's unconstitutional or illegal from a federal standpoint?
There will be significant problems if you phrase it as a bona fide residence requirement. That is, we want to make sure you're not simply here for the summer and are going to be leaving right afterwards. The Supreme Court, here I'm simply reporting on the Supreme Court. We can have a debate as to whether this is in fact correct. But the Supreme Court has said they will consider tolerating very short residency requirements, but only as bona fide. And it's actually very clear. It's a case called Sands versus Roe, where someone moves to California. California at the time had a law that you couldn't get the same level of welfare benefits if you'd only been there for a short time. and the Supreme Court kicked it out, saying, no, once you conceded that Roe was a resident, she got the same benefits as people who've been there 80 years.
Okay.
Again, I'm simply reporting, not necessarily expressing a legal
That's one follow-up question.
One follow-up, and then I think because we
I'd like to
have
see a vote by the three attorneys. How many of you think that there may be elements of Plan Maryland that are unconstitutional?
How about the whole plan?
you have one quick, short question?
Yes, Delegate Ballstriker made the statement that this was not a good time for the Constitutional Convention, but I got the implication that there might be conditions that might be more favorable for a Constitutional Convention. Could he comment on that, please?
Well, as you know, this is on the ballot. Our Constitution requires that it be on the ballot in Maryland every so often, and we almost got there this year. But there is, the Constitution requires that you count the number of people who voted for the constitutional convention based not on the majority of voters who voted in the election, but the majority of voters who are registered. So by that measure, we did not receive a majority to have a constitutional convention. Did I say that correctly? Okay. I'm not sure, what the particular circumstances are that you're referring to. I think the fact is, just as a matter of psychology, people put a lot of stature into what our forebears have done, and I think are cynical about their contemporaries. And certainly, the founders, as we know, were human beings with flaws and their own moral problems that they had to deal with, and they were no different from us in terms of their time and their humanness. But I think people look around the room here and say, well, I'd love to have a constitutional convention, but I don't exactly trust these folks here. Clearly, the folks who originated the Maryland Constitution must have been wiser than us. I don't think that's true, but I think it's natural to look upon the past with a sense of nostalgia and a belief that that the writers of our Maryland Constitution may have had some greater wisdom than we do, and I think that's part of the reason you don't see a huge movement towards a constitutional convention in Maryland.
I don't think
Very
there
quickly.
may be divisiveness between the two parties present.
I think the answer to that is making sure that we don't have the parties or the people there in charge of who they're going to be on this. We need to go outside of the legislature. Individually, we're all pillars of virtue down there. Collectively, we're a threat to all of you. So individually, everything's great. When you put us all together, I don't want them down there mixing with the Second Amendment, mixing with everything else when they get in. So if we could say, we're going to go outside, we're going to get some law professors, I'd be glad. Go out and get some people who have studied the law, understand it, maybe a philosophy major, some history major, some other people outside of the legislature, so there's not as much politics in it.
How about, let's